Life often feels heavier than it needs to be. Every choice, every word, every glance seems to carry a weight far beyond what it should. We move through our days convinced that the world is keeping score, measuring our worth, tallying our failures, applauding our successes. Yet the Stoics remind us that the universe is indifferent. Our power lies not in controlling events, but in mastering our own responses. The freedom that comes from clarity, courage, and virtue transforms each moment into an opportunity for insight and presence. There is a quiet strength in stepping back from the compulsive seriousness that governs so much of our lives. By observing our judgments and recognizing what is truly within our control, we move more lightly through the world. Life does not demand perfection. It calls only for honesty, attention, and resilience. The more we practice this perspective, the more we realize that meaning is not something to chase. It is something we uncover in the very act of living with integrity, awareness, and intentionality. Every day presents a choice to act with intention or to be carried along by anxiety, expectation, and imagined stakes. Stoicism teaches that the arena that matters is the one inside our own minds. By cultivating presence, by observing without clinging, we find a steadiness no external event can shake. Moments once weighed down by fear or judgment begin to reveal their depth. Life, in its ordinary flow, offers clarity, insight, and quiet joy to those willing to notice. Life is a theater in which we step onto a stage written by invisible scripts, some imposed by society, some imagined by our own mind. From the moment we awaken, thoughts begin their relentless commentary. What will others think of me today? Did I perform well enough yesterday? Will my efforts matter in the long run? Each thought piles onto the next, constructing invisible walls around our perception of reality. Yet these stories, as compelling as they feel, are entirely mental constructs. They exist only because we feed them attention, belief, and energy. Observe them as clouds drifting across the vast sky of consciousness. Notice how they shift, change shape, and eventually dissolve. Shadows may fall, but the sky itself remains unchanged. The narratives we cling to, success, recognition, approval, gain substance only because we insist they define our worth. Clinging amplifies anxiety. The mind interprets importance as survival, and suddenly every comment, every overlooked opportunity feels like a verdict. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Suffering is not mandated by circumstance. It is manufactured internally by the stories and judgments we habitually repeat. Recognizing this is the first step toward freedom, the moment when the mind begins to disentangle itself from its own compulsions. Once we notice these stories, a subtle shift occurs. The space between stimulus and response begins to open. We are no longer automatically bound to our narratives. The compulsive need to defend, explain, or perform diminishes because the imagined authority of these thoughts has dissolved. Anxiety, often born not from events but from anticipation, projection, or fear of judgment, begins to soften. Each imagined catastrophe, each mental rehearsal of failure, is revealed as an unnecessary expenditure of energy. That energy can now be directed toward deliberate engagement with reality, attentive action, and internal cultivation of virtue. Seneca writes, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." The realization that the majority of our suffering is self-created allows clarity to emerge. We begin to live more intentionally, seeing events for what they are, rather than coloring them with exaggerated stakes. By examining assumptions, questioning stories, and observing their impermanence, the mind grows lighter. Decisions become aligned with principles, not fear. Actions arise from reason, not compulsion. The first layer of true freedom unfolds quietly, yet profoundly, shaping the mind's capacity to respond rather than react. The distinction between what is within our control and what is not becomes increasingly clear. Life flows whether we resist or release it. The sun rises, the wind shifts, and seasons turn without our permission. Yet our thoughts, choices, and virtues remain fully ours to govern. By focusing attention on what can be influenced, we conserve energy, reduce unnecessary anxiety, and reclaim mental space. Aligning effort with what is within our power produces calmness, intentionality, and efficiency. Fear of uncontrollable outcomes loses its grip, and we respond to the world with clarity rather than compulsion. Each moment, once fraught with imagined stakes, becomes an opportunity to practice virtue and deliberate attention. Work, relationships, and decisions are approached with steadiness, and the energy once spent resisting the inevitable is now available for meaningful engagement. With presence comes depth. When the mind is no longer fragmented by anxiety or expectation, life becomes tangible in its immediacy. Ordinary moments, walking, listening, observing, tasting, speaking, reveal layers of richness previously unnoticed. Attention can rest fully on what exists rather than on projections of what might happen or should happen. Marcus Aurelius's advice resonates. Confine yourself to the present. Presence cultivates perception, insight, and a quiet joy arising from engagement itself, unburdened by compulsion. Relationships become authentic. Conversations are no longer tests of worth. Actions and responses flow naturally from observation, empathy, and reason. Empathy, freed from fear or expectation, deepens. Listening becomes deliberate. Speaking becomes honest. Connection is no longer transactional, but alive with understanding and clarity. The ordinary reveals its depth when observed with intentional attention, and life itself begins to feel lighter, richer, and more vivid. This clarity extends to work and purpose. Effort is no longer a measure of worth or a performance to be evaluated. Each action, whether mundane or monumental, becomes a practice in virtue. Marcus Aurelius' teaching applies: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Work is transformed into an exercise in deliberate attention, integrity, and alignment with principles. Tasks are approached with focus and care, free from the weight of imagined judgment. Even challenges and setbacks are reframed as opportunities to cultivate patience, resilience, and wisdom. The mind, no longer enslaved by expectation, experiences clarity, freedom, and a sense of purposeful engagement in every endeavor. Success is measured internally by alignment and virtue, not externally by applause or recognition. Ultimately, joy emerges as a natural consequence of this practice. By acting as if nothing matters, detaching from imagined stakes and compulsive attachment, we paradoxically discover the inherent weight and value of life. Love, forgiveness, and laughter flow more freely. Change, loss, and death are no longer terrifying because they are understood as part of the natural rhythm. Life is not denied or avoided. It is fully embraced, danced with grace rather than wrestled with force. The art of living lightly, as the Stoics envisioned, allows a mind unshackled by fear or obsession to experience clarity, resilience, and freedom. Every moment becomes alive with potential, observation, and deliberate engagement, cultivating a life rich with presence, insight, and authenticity. If you have found yourself reflecting on these ideas, subscribing is more than a simple click. It is a choice to continue exploring clarity, freedom, and virtue alongside a community committed to reflection and mindful living. Subscribing is a commitment to yourself, a step toward cultivating presence, awareness, and the quiet strength to live intentionally. The more you observe life, the clearer the line becomes between what is within your control and what is not. So much of human energy is spent wrestling with circumstances that will never bend to our will, trying to shape reality as though it were clay in our hands. The sun rises whether we notice or not. The wind shifts without our permission. Storms arrive unannounced, and seasons change regardless of our plans. To resist these natural flows is to invite tension, frustration, and anxiety. Yet within this same reality, there is a sphere that remains entirely ours: our responses, our intentions, our choices. The power of focus lies not in demanding that the world conform, but in cultivating mastery over the part we can influence. At first, this distinction can feel subtle, almost imperceptible. Life has a way of convincing us that external events are inseparable from our well-being. A missed opportunity, an unkind word, or a failure of circumstance often feels like an assault on the self. But when the mind begins to disentangle the external from the internal, the liberation is immediate. Anxiety diminishes because effort is no longer squandered on resisting the inevitable. Energy once lost in futile struggle becomes available for purposeful action. When you align effort with what you can influence, your thoughts, choices, and virtues, each decision becomes precise, intentional, and impactful. Nothing is wasted. The serenity that emerges is not passive resignation, but an active clarity, a conscious acceptance of reality as it is, coupled with deliberate action where change is possible. This principle applies to every corner of existence. In relationships, we cannot dictate how another person thinks, feels, or reacts. In work, we cannot control market fluctuations, competition, or the unpredictable outcomes of our endeavors. In life more broadly, we cannot ensure that circumstances will align perfectly with our desires. The Stoics observed that suffering arises not from what happens to us, but from the misplaced belief that it should not happen. When you release the illusion of control over externals, your attention becomes sharper, your choices cleaner, and your engagement with the world more grounded. Focusing on what is within your power prevents waste and cultivates a life of deliberate attention, free from the mental clutter of impossibilities. There is a profound psychological shift that occurs when you fully inhabit this perspective. Each time an event unfolds beyond your control, the mind no longer leaps to resistance. Instead, observation, reflection, and measured response take its place. Anger fades, disappointment softens, and frustration diminishes because the mind is no longer entangled in illusion. The space created by acceptance allows for intentional growth, strategic action, and the cultivation of virtues like courage, wisdom, and temperance. The world does not bend. It has no obligation to, yet you remain sovereign within the realm of your own choices. This sovereignty is not arrogance, nor is it withdrawal. It is the profound recognition that control is internal, and that external pressures are best met with reasoned engagement rather than frantic struggle. Even our perception of time is transformed when we operate from this understanding. When we expend effort attempting to control uncontrollable events, time feels scarce, hurried, and tense. Worries multiply and compound, creating the sensation of perpetual urgency. Conversely, focusing on what can be directed, our thoughts, actions, and virtues, restores a sense of spaciousness. Each moment can be lived intentionally rather than anxiously. The mind is freed from the endless loop of imagined scenarios and speculative anxieties. Each decision, each action, each interaction becomes aligned with our inner principles rather than external expectations. The energy once devoted to resisting what cannot be changed is now available to cultivate insight, resilience, and connection. Even seemingly mundane aspects of daily life reveal this principle in action. Traffic delays, unreturned messages, sudden changes in plans, these are minor disruptions that often provoke outsized emotional reactions. Observing how these events naturally occur outside your control illuminates the futility of resistance. Yet within each, there exists the opportunity to respond thoughtfully. A pause, a measured breath, a choice not to react impulsively. These small exercises in internal governance accumulate over time. Life becomes less a battlefield and more a practice ground for self-mastery. The mind learns that power lies not in control over externals, but in the discipline of its own faculties and in the cultivation of virtues that guide action consistently, regardless of circumstance. Through consistent practice, attention to what is controllable becomes habitual. Reactions are tempered, perspectives widened, and anxiety diminishes. Life retains its unpredictability, yet the mind becomes a steady vessel, capable of navigating turmoil with clarity and grace. By distinguishing between what is ours to shape and what is not, we cultivate both serenity and effectiveness. The effort we expend aligns with action that matters. The mental space freed from futile attempts at control becomes fertile ground for wisdom, presence, and resilience. In this conscious engagement with what can be influenced, we discover the true power of freedom, sovereignty over the self amidst the immensity of a world that unfolds without our command. Clinging to outcomes, approval, and imagined importance consumes more energy than most of us realize. Every disappointment feels like a weight pressing against the chest, every rejection a mirror showing some flaw we've internalized as absolute. Yet when the mind begins to release its insistence on control, the way we perceive these events transforms. Life's challenges no longer appear as verdicts on our character, but as invitations to practice discernment, patience, and resilience. Rejection, failure, or disappointment become data points, not indictments. They illuminate our habitual reactions, reveal attachments, and highlight where our focus may have strayed. This subtle shift from perceiving events as judgments to seeing them as reflections creates a space where clarity can emerge, and from that space, intentional action arises naturally, unburdened by fear of judgment or imagined consequences. It is astonishing how much of human suffering is tied to the compulsion to be significant. We act as though recognition, reward, or status determines our worth, yet these external markers are fleeting and unreliable. When we grasp this, a new paradox reveals itself. By loosening the grip on significance, significance begins to appear organically in life. Moments once unnoticed, the spontaneous laughter of a friend, the quiet insight of an idea, the simple satisfaction of well-chosen action become profound in their immediacy. We begin to notice the depth of ordinary experiences, not because they are measured against imagined standards, but because they exist fully and unfiltered. Even our perception of failure transforms under this lens. What once appeared catastrophic now reveals patterns, lessons, and opportunities for adjustment. Each misstep is analyzed not for shame, but for insight. The Stoics emphasized that judgment creates suffering. The act of seeing failures objectively, without coloring them with imagined stakes, cultivates resilience. We become capable of responding thoughtfully, learning efficiently, and moving forward with calm intention rather than reactive anxiety. The mind, once dominated by fear of loss or humiliation, becomes a tool for discernment, reflection, and deliberate action. This detachment from outcome does not breed passivity or indifference. It fosters engagement with precision and clarity. Actions are no longer clouded by worry, but arise from reasoned understanding of cause and effect, virtue and practical possibility. Energy is redirected from resisting circumstance toward what can be influenced, our thoughts, habits, and responses. Ultimately, the practice of letting go of unnecessary attachment to significance reveals a paradoxical truth. Meaning is amplified, not diminished. Life becomes richer, more vivid, and more aligned with authentic values. We act with presence, integrity, and intentionality, while the noise of imagined judgment falls away. Our focus shifts from defending an arbitrary sense of worth to cultivating inner virtues that carry enduring value. The mind learns to perceive life clearly, to engage fully, and to find contentment in effort itself. By releasing the compulsion to fight for significance, we discover that happiness and fulfillment are not earned through external recognition, They are uncovered in the quiet mastery of perspective, the alignment of action with principle, and the freedom to engage without attachment to outcome. The insight gained here ripples across every facet of life. Each day presents challenges that once would have triggered anxiety or fear, but now are met with measured response and discernment. Social interactions, professional efforts, and creative pursuits become arenas of mindful engagement rather than stages for performance or judgment. The liberation from clinging allows observation without overreaction, participation without obsession, and effort without compulsion. This is the essence of Stoic resilience, clarity, presence, and the freedom to act with virtue in a world that unfolds independently of our demands or expectations. Through sustained practice, this shift becomes habitual. Happiness no longer hinges on approval, significance no longer depends on external validation, and disappointment loses its sting. Life flows more smoothly, not because circumstances have changed, but because the mind has recalibrated its responses. Each moment is observed, reflected upon, and engaged with deliberately, and the wisdom gained from this approach compounds over time. Reactions are tempered, attention is focused, and energy is conserved. In releasing the compulsive need for importance, we reclaim both inner freedom and presence, discovering a deeper, more resilient form of contentment that thrives amidst the unpredictability of life. There is a profound shift that occurs when the mind stops straining for control and begins to inhabit the present moment fully. Time, once experienced as a series of obligations, deadlines, and imagined consequences, stretches into clarity and possibility. Every sensation, every detail, every nuance that previously went unnoticed begins to take on significance simply because attention rests upon it. The rustle of leaves, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the sound of a distant conversation, these are no longer background noise, but a rich tapestry of existence to be felt and appreciated. In this state, life ceases to be a performance for others or a test of self-worth. It becomes immediate, tangible, and alive. The Stoics taught that the mind is the gateway to freedom. When awareness is cultivated, the ordinary transforms into extraordinary, because presence itself is an act of engagement, a form of conscious participation in the unfolding of reality. The liberation of attention from fear, judgment, and imagined expectation allows a subtler, more profound kind of clarity to emerge. Mental chatter, the endless speculation about outcomes, the anxiety about what might happen, and the self-imposed obligations to prove one's worth, loses its urgency. Without these burdens, the mind can rest lightly, noticing what is rather than projecting what should be. Every act, whether pouring a cup of tea, walking along a quiet street, or listening to a friend, becomes a microcosm of lived experience, complete in itself. Each moment becomes a portal through which insight, creativity, and connection flow, unimpeded by distraction or obsession. By dwelling fully in the present, the mind sheds the weight of imagined significance and discovers a rhythm in which awareness and action are harmonized. This shift also deepens the texture of perception. Previously unnoticed details, colors, textures, sounds, patterns of movement become vivid, as if the world itself has gained new depth. Ordinary tasks, like preparing a meal or folding clothes, become opportunities for engagement rather than obligations. The experience of eating, speaking, walking, or observing becomes a meditation in motion. Seneca described a similar state when he wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future." The richness of life is not created by grand gestures or monumental achievements. It is revealed in the clarity of perception that arises when the mind is no longer fragmented by fear, judgment, or imagined stakes. Presence allows the ordinary to reveal its beauty, the mundane to disclose its value, and the simple act of living to feel like a profound exercise in participation. As presence deepens, attention becomes less scattered and more precise. The mind no longer flits from worry to anticipation, from regret to longing. Instead, awareness rests gently on the unfolding of reality, capturing what is as it is rather than what is imagined. This heightened state of presence has a remarkable effect on emotion. Anxiety softens, frustration loses its edge, and even grief can be held with gentleness rather than resistance. Without the overlay of imagined consequences, we can witness our internal states without being overwhelmed by them. Emotions are allowed to exist fully without dominating attention, creating a form of psychological resilience rooted in observation rather than suppression. By concentrating on conscious engagement and letting the rest unfold naturally, we cultivate a mind capable of navigating complexity with steadiness, openness, and clarity. The present becomes a sanctuary in which internal states are observed, understood, and integrated, rather than feared or manipulated. Presence also amplifies the quality of our interactions with the world and others. Listening becomes deeper, more attentive, and more responsive. Conversation is no longer a performance or an exercise in impression management, but an exchange grounded in awareness and mutual attention. Creativity flourishes because the mind is no longer preoccupied with judgment, comparison, or imagined standards of success. Each decision, each action, each gesture arises from a place of clarity and intentionality, unclouded by compulsive thought. Aristotle reflected on the natural alignment of action and awareness, noting that pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. When attention is liberated from fear or imagined evaluation, the work itself, the engagement itself, becomes the source of fulfillment and insight. The shift toward presence changes our perception of time itself. What once felt rushed or scarce expands into a continuum of opportunity and reflection. We notice rhythms, patterns, and the flow of life that previously went unrecognized. Each moment is complete in itself, sufficient without external validation or imagined urgency. The mind becomes a participant rather than a spectator, observing without interference while also acting with discernment and integrity. Socrates' observation resonates here. Beware the barrenness of a busy life. Activity without presence produces motion, but not engagement. By inhabiting the present, we transform motion into meaningful action and observation into insight, cultivating both depth and clarity in experience. Ultimately, this awareness fosters a lighter, more resilient heart. Freed from the compulsion to perform, prove, or anticipate, we can approach life with openness, curiosity, and gratitude. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, not because it changes, but because perception changes. Life is no longer a rehearsal for an imagined audience or a series of tests for approval. It is a field of conscious participation, a series of moments to be attended to fully, each rich in texture, insight, and meaning. By cultivating presence, we reclaim the vibrancy of experience, the clarity of perception, and the freedom to engage with life on our own terms, grounded in Stoic wisdom and the attentive observation of the world as it truly is. Relationships are among the clearest mirrors of our inner state, and they respond directly to the level of presence and freedom we carry. When we are tethered to external validation, every interaction becomes a test, a measure of worth, a negotiation for approval, a silent scorecard of social performance. Words are chosen not for clarity or truth, but for effect. Gestures are calculated to impress or appease. The heart of connection is replaced by the mind's constant tallying, and what should be an exchange of understanding becomes an exhausting performance. Yet, when the mind is unburdened by the need to prove itself, these interactions shift in quality. Conversations cease to feel like examinations, and relationships stop being arenas in which self-worth is staked. What emerges instead is authenticity, an unforced engagement that is profoundly liberating. The absence of compulsive calculation allows presence to enter fully, creating the conditions for dialogue, intimacy, and understanding to flourish naturally. Freedom from attachment to outcomes also changes the stakes of conflict. Disagreements, misunderstandings, and mistakes no longer trigger fear of rejection or shame. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to exercise patience, discernment, and reasoned response. When reactions are guided by conscious choice rather than compulsion or fear, tension dissolves naturally. The mind, no longer preoccupied with anticipated judgment, can navigate difficulty with composure. Conversations that once would have escalated into argument now unfold with measured attention, each party able to express themselves without defensive overcompensation. The relational space itself becomes a reflection of inner mastery, a mirror of the serenity and clarity cultivated within. This shift also alters the subtle chemistry of human connection. When anxiety about impression or evaluation is removed, presence becomes noticeable to others. There is a transparency, a calm confidence that invites trust and openness. Genuine engagement attracts reciprocity. People respond to the clarity and authenticity of someone unbound by fear. Carl Jung noted that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. In relational terms, this transformation occurs because the absence of clinging creates room for mutual discovery, insight, and shared growth. Relationships cease to be transactional and instead become arenas of co-creation, where each participant contributes to a shared dynamic that is alive, responsive, and evolving. Even everyday interactions benefit from this presence. Small gestures, a nod, a smile, a word of acknowledgement are no longer weighed for their impact on reputation or significance. Attention and care can be offered fully, without expecting validation or reciprocation. The mind that clings to approval converts even minor social exchanges into rehearsals, performances, or calculations. The liberated mind sees each moment as it is, recognizing that value lies not in outcomes, but in engagement itself. Aristotle's observation that pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work extends naturally to relationships. The act of engaging fully, attentively, and without obsession over results becomes its own reward. We experience connection not because it elevates our social standing, but because participation itself is meaningful. This freedom also allows for emotional honesty. Without the constant fear of judgment, we can express vulnerability without expectation of response, disappointment, or approval. Empathy is deepened because it arises naturally, not from obligation or calculation. The quality of listening improves because the mind is not preoccupied with self-defense or proving worth. The Stoics emphasize that internal mastery shapes perception of the external world. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." By releasing dependence on the reactions of others, relational life loses its weight of anxiety. Our experience is shaped by intention, presence, and virtue rather than imagined evaluation. Even challenging relationships transform under this principle. Interpersonal friction, resentment, and disappointment are natural parts of social life. The mind, unbound by compulsive attachment, can engage with these moments with curiosity and clarity rather than reactivity. Conflicts become opportunities to practice patience, listening, and perspective-taking. Rejection or misunderstanding ceases to feel like a reflection of personal inadequacy. It is understood as circumstance beyond our control. The energy that was once wasted on defensiveness or anxiety is redirected toward understanding, problem-solving, and authentic engagement. Presence cultivates resilience and steadiness, enabling interactions to unfold with calm and intentionality. Ultimately, the wisdom of acting as if nothing matters becomes most tangible in relational life. Freed from the compulsive need to perform, explain, or justify, we engage authentically, attentively, and with a sense of lightness that permeates each interaction. The mind that once evaluated every gesture, word, and expression now participates fully, responding from awareness rather than compulsion. This does not diminish care or commitment. On the contrary, it enhances them, allowing acts of kindness, insight, and engagement to flow naturally and effectively. By consistently practicing presence in interactions, we begin to notice the subtle rhythms of human connection. Body language, tone, timing, and subtle shifts in emotion become perceptible in ways previously obscured by worry or preoccupation. Engagement becomes fluid, responsive, and alive, as attention rests fully on what is happening rather than what might happen or should happen. The relational space itself becomes fertile ground for insight, growth, and authentic exchange. The mind, no longer fragmented by fear of judgment or attachment to results, becomes capable of perceiving and responding with clarity, compassion, and intentionality. This transformation of relational life mirrors the larger shift in perspective. Happiness and connection emerge not from controlling others or demanding validation, but from mastering attention, presence, and internal freedom. There is a remarkable shift that happens when effort is untethered from the need for external validation. Tasks that once felt heavy, stressful, or laden with expectation suddenly unfold with a sense of purpose and ease. Work is no longer a means to prove worth, and achievement is no longer a measure of value. The compulsion to control outcomes, to anticipate judgment, or to demand recognition dissipates. What remains is the act itself, the deliberate, attentive, and principled engagement with what lies directly before you. This is the essence of Stoic practice, aligning action with virtue, principle, and intention, rather than with the applause, acknowledgement, or judgment of others. In such a state, effort itself becomes sufficient, a testament to the capacity of the human mind to operate independently of circumstance. When work is approached as practice rather than performance, the very notion of burden is transformed. Mundane tasks, small routines, and everyday responsibilities are no longer chores to endure or hoops to jump through. They become the canvas upon which presence, skill, and wisdom are exercised. Each gesture, each choice, becomes an opportunity to enact courage, patience, and discernment. The Stoics emphasized that excellence is found in the fidelity of action, not in its recognition. Marcus Aurelius observed, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one." In this context, each task is a chance to practice being the person you aim to be, without waiting for external validation. The weight of judgment lifts, and the mind finds freedom in deliberate, focused action. The liberation from attachment to outcomes also changes the rhythm of ambition and aspiration. Goals are no longer fetters but signposts, guiding attention towards skillful practice and steady growth. Progress becomes measurable by internal alignment rather than external recognition. Repeated effort strengthens capacity, insight, and character rather than feeding anxiety or insecurity. Carl Jung suggested that your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Applying this insight, work and purpose become reflections of internal clarity and conscious choice, not performances staged for reward or approval. The focus shifts from achievement as a standard to engagement as a practice of virtue. Even high-stakes or high-visibility tasks transform under this lens. Pressure diminishes when the mind understands that worth is not contingent upon outcome. Performance anxiety loses its grip, replaced by an attentive engagement that allows for flexibility, creativity, and adaptability. Every decision, every act, every contribution is judged not by its recognition, but by the integrity with which it is carried out. This internal standard, rooted in Stoic principle, anchors effort. It provides direction and focus while protecting the mind from being destabilized by external forces. Effort becomes sustainable, energy is preserved, and the experience of work itself becomes satisfying because the mind is free from compulsion. Work is also enriched by presence. Mundane tasks no longer escape attention, and repetitive effort becomes an arena for mastery. Even actions that feel routine or trivial are engaged with fully because they are now seen as practice in patience, diligence, and awareness. This transformation naturally affects the way purpose is perceived. Rather than being something imposed externally or artificially measured, purpose emerges from alignment with principles, values, and reasoned understanding of what is within your control. Tasks are undertaken not to impress, satisfy, or accumulate accolades, but because they are the right actions in the moment. This approach cultivates a profound satisfaction, one rooted in intentionality and internal harmony rather than in contingent results. Even failure is reframed under this perspective. Setbacks are no longer indictments of worth. They are occasions to refine skill, deepen insight, and exercise resilience. The mind, untethered from the need to prove itself, responds with evaluation and adaptation rather than panic or self-recrimination. Each mistake becomes feedback, each challenge a lesson in virtue applied under pressure. The Stoics called this training of the soul, preparing it to act rightly regardless of circumstance. By internalizing this approach, work is experienced as a continuous, unfolding exercise in mastery, rather than a series of tests against an imaginary scoreboard. Relationships with colleagues, collaborators, and even clients transform as well. Actions, feedback, and outcomes are approached with clarity and integrity, rather than attachment to praise or avoidance of criticism. Interactions become principled and purposeful, and judgment no longer interferes with engagement. Presence, attention, and virtue guide communication, collaboration, and contribution. Seneca noted, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." When attachment to recognition is removed, both the individual and those around them experience a sense of sufficiency, clarity, and mutual trust. Ultimately, approaching work and purpose in this manner fosters a deep, resilient satisfaction. Each act is intentional, every decision aligned with principle, and energy is conserved for what truly matters. Anxiety, distraction, and over-attachment diminish, leaving space for creativity, insight, and growth. Life becomes an unfolding exercise in excellence, measured by alignment with virtue rather than applause, reward, or permanence. The liberation is profound. Effort becomes both effortless and meaningful, and the mind experiences freedom within the structure of conscious engagement. By acting with integrity and attending fully to each task, whether monumental or mundane, we transform work from a source of tension into a practice of mastery and self-mastery, discovering fulfillment in the act itself rather than in its outcome. There comes a point in this journey where the mind, unburdened by the compulsion to control, begins to experience a rare and resilient form of joy. It is quiet, subtle, yet profoundly deep, like the steady rhythm of a river flowing unhurriedly through a landscape that shifts and changes, yet remains whole. This is not the fleeting exhilaration of pleasure or the temporary relief from desire. It is a satisfaction rooted in clarity, presence, and the alignment of thought and action with reason. By acting as if nothing matters in the sense of being detached from external validation or imagined stakes, we paradoxically discover that everything holds significance in its own natural way. The freedom from compulsion does not strip life of value. It reveals the intrinsic weight and texture of each moment. The mind that releases the need to measure, control, or justify begins to perceive the subtle harmonies of existence. Life's beauty is not created through our manipulation or mastery, but through attentive observation, conscious participation, and appreciation for its unfolding. Each sound, each sight, Each interaction carries its own fullness when noticed without preconception or judgment. Carl Jung reflected on the transformative power of such awareness, writing, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." In living lightly, with awareness unclouded by fear or obsession, we step closer to this realization. Ordinary experiences gain depth, subtlety, and meaning simply because we engage with them fully, without the overlay of anxiety, comparison, or artificial expectation. Joy becomes an emergent property of presence, a reflection of internal alignment rather than external circumstance. Forgiveness and compassion flow naturally from this liberated state. When attachment to personal outcomes, recognition, or expectation diminishes, grudges lose their power. Offense and hurt are observed, acknowledged, and released, rather than internalized or magnified by imagined injustice. Relationships shift in tone and quality because the mind no longer operates from scarcity, fear, or defensiveness. Epictetus emphasized this principle when he said, "If someone succeeds in causing you distress, realize that it is not they who harm you, but your own judgment." The practice of acting lightly does not preclude justice or reasoned response, but it diminishes the grip of ego-driven reaction. In doing so, the heart becomes lighter, the spirit more open, and the capacity for genuine connection expands. The natural cycles of life, birth, change, aging, loss, and death, are no longer sources of terror or resistance. Observing these phenomena with detachment and clarity allows for a profound reconciliation with impermanence. We witness the ebb and flow of existence as neither punishment nor reward, but as the inevitable unfolding of a vast system in which our individual dramas are part of a larger rhythm. Marcus Aurelius captured this sentiment when he wrote, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." The fear of endings loses its intensity when we recognize that life, in its totality, operates beyond our personal control, and that each moment is sufficient unto itself. Acceptance of this truth brings serenity, clarity, and a profound ease of being. Even the challenges of life, suffering, disappointment, and adversity, lose their capacity to dominate when approached from this perspective. Struggles are no longer interpreted as personal failures or cosmic punishments. They are seen as opportunities to exercise reason, patience, and virtue. Stoic resilience emerges from the understanding that control resides within the mind, and that the external world unfolds independently of our attachment to it. The unshackled mind experiences challenge with composure, learns from difficulty without distortion, and continues to engage with life fully. Each obstacle becomes a teacher, each loss a lesson in perspective, and each limitation a guide to internal mastery. Ultimately, the art of living lightly, as the Stoics envisioned, is not denial, indifference, or escape. It is a conscious embrace of reality, an alignment with the natural order, and a willing participation in life's unfolding. The mind, unburdened by compulsive significance or attachment to outcome, is free to act, observe, and experience without distortion. Socrates' insight resonates here. The unexamined life is not worth living. By examining our assumptions about importance, control, and value, and releasing those that are unnecessary, we discover a freedom that is both simple and profound. Laughter flows more easily, love is more generous, forgiveness more natural, and the appreciation of beauty more acute. Death, change, and impermanence are understood as integral to the rhythm of life, rather than as threats or interruptions. In this liberated state, life is experienced fully, vividly, and without artificial weighting. Each breath, each sensation, each thought and interaction is noticed, attended to, and appreciated. Joy emerges as a natural consequence of clarity, presence, and the alignment of intention with action. Work, relationships and daily engagements are infused with meaning, not because external standards demand it, but because the mind participates fully in the unfolding of reality. The Stoic path, practiced in this way, allows for a freedom that is both resilient and enduring, a capacity to be alive without the unnecessary burdens of fear, obsession, or compulsion. This is the culmination of a journey in which each preceding step, release of attachment, mastery of response, and cultivation of presence, converges into a life lived lightly, freely, and profoundly. And so, the journey toward living lightly, with clarity and presence, reminds us that the weight we carry is often of our own making. Freedom, resilience, and joy are not distant rewards. They are discovered in the way we choose to engage with each moment, fully and deliberately. Each breath, each decision, each connection becomes a testament to the strength of a mind unbound by fear, expectation, or imagined stakes. Carry this awareness forward, and life itself will reveal its quiet, enduring beauty. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal, for joining a community committed to reflection, growth, and mindful living. If you found value in this exploration, I encourage you to watch one of the suggested videos on the screen now and continue cultivating the perspective, presence, and freedom that make life profoundly rich.